Two, one, go. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Manna Daily Podcast. Today we have Cliff from Truth to Faith as my co-host and a very special guest and author, Gary Wayne. Gary, thank you for coming on today for this interview.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and so glad to be with you guys today and looking forward to the conversation.
Yes, I was first introduced to your book via the veins of Michael Heiser, and then somebody popped up and said, "Well, have you read other stuff that adds to the Nephilim aspect of Gary
Yeah.
Wayne?" And I was like, "Well, no." I said, "Who is this author?" So I was recommended highly, consistently. I started reading some reviews of your book, so I purchased it. I'm instantly a fan. And then I had immediately when I heard there was a second book, I think I was talking to one of my Instagram followers. She said she has a second book coming out, and I immediately had to get on the pre-order racket. And as we've talked on Cryptid Warfare, they gave me one of the week delay
Yeah,
aspects that were going
yeah,
on.
yeah.
Is there anything you want to tell people about your book, where they can purchase it? What's it entailing?
Yeah, so if people can see in the background, the dark colored one, the brown colored one with the seal is book one, and then the lighter colored one is book two. And I'll just get book two out there for people to see if they haven't seen the cover yet. So look for the
Beautiful.
camera there. So I wanted the covers to be kind of similar but distinct because there's two different goals for each of the books. So with book one, it was a fairly large sort of concept that I wanted to do that the publisher said you can't do it because you're getting into a crossover conundrum and nobody will buy your book because you'll get everybody upset at you and you
Mm-hmm.
won't have an audience. And so I understood that, but I thought I could write it in a way that there was still enough of a Christian biases in there to not get the real target argument of Christians to read it. But I was also looking to get people from outside the Christian faith to look at the Bible based on some of the things I was going to talk about in their book and using a lot of their accounts in their own words. And what I wanted to communicate also to Christians was that what book one was about is how the Bible intersects with a common history told around the world in all
Wonderful.
continents, in all cultures, and all religions. There's just a different lens. There's a cultural and a polytheist lens versus the monotheist lens,
Mm-hmm.
and that um, we can deny the records that they have, which is fine. I don't have a problem with that. But if you look at the accounts, the difference tends to be from a prehistorical and a historical aspect is that they're just viewing it through the pantheon of the gods and their religion. Now, when you get into what they plan to do and end time prophecy, that's in the polytheist religions, they have a different outcome, talking about the same events, but through a polytheist lens and a little bit different outcome. So I wanted people to understand that there's a sort of common legacy and that we should take the Bible more seriously about prehistory and
Love
that
that.
there are things that we need to be preparing for if we're going to be in the fig tree generation. So book two was not the book I thought I was going to write for my sequel. I actually set one aside and I'm getting back to that now, but I was
Oh,
struggling with struggling with that book anyways, and I was on it for a few years and it wasn't working properly. And but in the meantime, I kept because I do a lot of shows, I do a lot of social media, I do a lot of emails back and forth. I do shows where I just answer questions and there's a consistency to the emails I get from the Christians from the non-Christians. Um, the non-Christians would like to know more information about their family bloodlines and things like that, and some of the things in the religions of their relatives. The Christians want to know more about what's in the Bible.
yes.
And even though I take everything back to the Bible in book one, it wasn't this super deep dive, but nobody's done a super deep dive. So this book is targeted specifically at Christians, book two, but you don't have to be a Christian to read it. So if you want to know more about giants than you probably ever read about before,
Great.
you're going to want to read about this book. If you want to know how the angelic hierarchy fits, how that fits into the assembly of the gods and polytheism, that's in there too. If you want to know more about second incursion,
Yeah.
that's in there too. If you want to know about who the hybrid tribes, that's in there. If you want to know about the specific giant tribes listed in the Bible, which is way more than what people can imagine. And I take them all, both the hybrid human giants and the post-Diluvian giants, back to specific Rephaim patriarchs,
Yes.
so that they know where that tribe came from and how we understand that they are a giant tribe. I take all that information for the context for the giant wars, Genesis 14 and the Exodus wars, and the
Right.
Judges War, King Saul, King David, and right down through King Solomon, and how we know these are wars against giants using all the information that was done before. And then I link all of that information on context into books too, to help understand end time prophecy. Because one of my concepts is that if you want to understand the full meaning of what is going to be coming, you have to understand, and you have to understand prehistory, because all the context for the allegory is in there.
1,000%.
Because we're told that it's going to be like the days of Noah, but in a greater way than standard dogma would suggest. And that's why I lead with the days of Noah in chapter 1, but also through Ecclesiastics that supports the generation of Noah as part of the fig tree generation, as part of the overarching signs for the oratory that Jesus provided. But Ecclesiastics 1 talks about there's nothing new under the sun. What
Yes.
was will be again.
Mm.
And that as you get into about verse 18, that this understanding is going to give you grief and sorrow when you understand what they're talking about. So that grief and sorrow is understanding that we're going to go through what happened before the flood and what has been tried to put forward in throughout our history that has been delayed, so that all the names in the book of life that were written in that book before creation have an opportunity to keep their names in that book of life or have it blotted
Right.
out. So there's an ordained time. So yeah, this book is then transitions into an end time chronology using the information from prehistory to help give it more understanding. And I put my approach to prophecy, which is kind of different than everybody because I'm a contrarian. So
Thank
that
you.
would
Same.
be
Yes.
that would be normal. And so people can understand how I got there. And it's
Right.
not rocket science, but it is hard rock disciplines that I use to keep me on track. So
Mhm.
I like to do simple things like I put things around, and I won't go through them all, but I like to put all things around in prophecy around what Jesus said and not vice versa. And that includes the book of Revelation because it's his testimony given to an angel to,
Right.
to show John. It has to fit. It's not going to be in
Well,
contradiction, otherwise it wouldn't be God's word. So,
do
and
you get? Sorry.
simple things like just one other thing on it, and simple things like I do not leave out inconvenient passages, because all of
Mm.
the preconceived agendas have to ignore inconvenient passages, reinvent what Jesus said, or reinvent what the actual passage said to make their eschatology work. And
Right.
I don't think you should have to be a master pretzel maker to understand the Bible. It just makes no sense that it was written for people to understand, not to not understand.
Right. And I think like a lot of the content that I do as well, you get the people that are popping up where, oh, you're adjusting it to fit your narrative. And
Yeah.
what I like about what you're doing, you're viewing their texts. You're trying to make like align it. Does it make sense with what we have as a Bible?
Yep.
And I think if forgive me if I'm wrong, but is there not passages where Christ and some of the later New Testament, like Jude and Peter, make possible references to the Nephilim and the sins of the angels?
Yeah. And it needs to be read into context of the narrative that it's in.
Hmm.
Narrative also links in sins at Sodom and Gomorrah as being
Yes.
kin, filthy conversations and sins that were done,
Hmm.
and things that, put angels in violation of what we would understand that's not written in that text as some of the laws against um, creation and against humans for the things that they do. So that's why chapter 1 in book 2 is so important, is that the days of Noah and Sodom and Gomorrah are used in Jesus's oration for the end times.
Yes.
And it's the days of Noah in Mark and Matthew, but in Luke, he connects it to, he talks about the days of Noah, but then he connects it to Sodom and Gomorrah. It's like both.
Mm-hmm.
And so the same crimes that were committed before the flood are the same crimes being committed at Sodom and Gomorrah. So expand that sort of understanding. And that Second Peter and Jude 1 and First Peter are references to in support of the crimes that the antediluvians did, and that these things resurface again after the flood. And Sodom and Gomorrah is used as a allegory both in the Old Testament and the New Testament for the destruction of the end time.
Mm-hmm.
So again, that is very, very important. So, and I cover off the meaning of the term days so that we understand it, that you could be a few days, it could be a few years, but it could be Noah's generation. And is it 950 years, 600 before the flood,
Right.
350 afterwards, or is it the 120 years that life is limited to
Yeah.
in Genesis 6:3 and the creation of the giants and the preamble to the flood story? Is it 70 years in the book of Psalms, or is it 40 years that's talked about in the wilderness in Leviticus and Exodus and Numbers? So I pull all of that sort of together so that we can have an understanding of that application throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament, that it is part of the information that is the fig tree generation, and it falls immediately after as one of the three archetypical signs for the chronology that Jesus is going to provide.
Mm-hmm.
So when we look at the days of Noah, it's exactly those words that are used
Yeah.
in Genesis 9:29. And so we're being encouraged to learn about all the things that happen in Noah's generation and the 100 years of his commission, 500 years to 600
Right.
going on onto the ark. And then within his 350 years after the flood, which is going to encompass the years of Sodom and Gomorrah.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at 2348 as Amu Monday, is what the Jewish rabbis have used for a date, and I kind of like that date, and I use
Okay.
it a lot in book 2, and I'll use it a lot in book 3, and it brings chronology timelines together, particularly as you go through book 2 and again in a book 3. That'll be down the road, a couple of years down the road probably, but so when we look at all of those things that were happening there, there's commonalities. There's angels that walked amongst humans as fallen
Yes.
angels, both before and after the flood. There's a technology that's involved, both before and immediately after the flood. There's a mystical religion, both before and after the flood.
Yeah.
That's a universal religion. And so many other things, but just to sort of list that there's commonalities that we're needing to understand sort of the nuances of. And so when we look at standard dogma that looks at the days of Noah, that people were carrying on and they're godless and there's some violence, we're understanding it in our
Real.
terms,
Right.
right? But not in the expanded term. And they say, well, there's nowhere in there does it talk about giants except in the days of Noah, both before and after the flood, there's giants,
Right.
and that the violence comes from the giants.
Yeah.
It is the cause for the flood as the context. And it's more than just the violence. It wasn't swords as people understood. You had a development of technology before the flood that we're just catching up to today.
Mm-hmm.
So if we have the ability to destroy the world today, and we're still not caught up to their technology because we can't build the sites that they did,
Right.
do it to the same degree of accuracy, of alignments, of being able to survive X amount of time, moving
Right.
those blocks properly, the quality of the meat. We can't do any of that. It's just the tip of the iceberg as to the knowledge that they had. So they had the ability to destroy the earth with the violence. So when we talk about antediluvian wars, look at it that it's the same type of war and capability that is coming in the end time. We didn't get a destruction by fire, which again is important to understand. Sodom and Gomorrah, adding on to the days of Noah in the book of Luke, is that the world was, flooded with water, but in the end time, it's going to be destruction by fire. So it's a transitional allegory linking both sides for the understanding, and that had God not stepped in, that world would have been destroyed by fire.
Wow.
But to ensure all the names are fulfilled, in the Book of Life, he interceded and started again.
So that's something I've always been wondering about because I've seen the hieroglyphics where they show something like the bomb, was it Little Boy that we dropped in Japan, and there was something like a hieroglyphic that showed something very similarly egg shaped.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my question to you, did you think that they had some sort of like cryo freezing thing for the Giants during the flood to explain how they survived and came back? Because
Yeah.
I've heard several variations. What's your number one plausible theory that you lean towards? I'm curious.
Yeah, and in book one, I'm talking about several versions. I don't really talk
Yeah.
about the one bucket where it's through the DNA of giants and the wives that is held out there. I don't think you can carry the four races and the giant DNA and not have, and the human DNA not to have a conflict in there in terms of how it's going to be reproduced after the flood. So I lock it down to two ways. First, one that I think most people tend to side on is somehow surviving on another ark, as in some stories like with the Epic of Gilgamesh with Utnapishtim, or with Deucalion. But those are giant accounts of the flood. They're not the Noah survival, as because they're giants. They're two-thirds God and one-third human, as they're described in the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Right.
And Deucalion is the son of Prometheus, of a god. So
Yes.
he's a demigod. So is Pyrrha, a female giant, or Titanandes. And so somehow on an ark, or somehow with that, and that's with the help of angels, and under the bucket of on with the angels, is in the earth, above the earth, in another dimension, in some sort of technology, as you're referencing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I leave a crack open for that. My favorite position is second incursion, which book two details. And as opposed to being a little bit more narrower and actually saying, well, why didn't you just put down in book one what your view was? I'm trying to get people to understand that we don't exactly have a smoking gun verse as
Concrete.
to
Right.
how they survive after the flood. And in 6:4, that people point to where it says they went again, and as you take that back to Hebrew, and I do in book two, and believe me, if people are familiar with Dr. Heiser's work,
Yeah.
this is Dr. Heiser on steroids, as what for Christians, just as book one is. Book two is book one on steroids for Christians as well. So it goes so deep in terms of giving you information that you're not going to find anywhere else. So when we're talking about, I'm just trying to remember where I was before I went down that rabbit trail.
Oh, we were
Um,
talking about pre flood
oh,
where they had all the
about how they
technology.
survive. So yeah,
Yes.
so
Yeah.
second incursion is my most favorite position. It fits
Okay.
the Bible best, and I show that in book two.
Okay.
Um, and but I do leave that crack open because you can make a legal argument that fallen angels survived the flood. And how you get there biblically is in both in Genesis chapter 6 and Genesis chapter 7. It says that God is going to destroy everything he created. He did not create the giants. That
Right.
was fallen angels with probably the Canaanites, or Canaanites, I mean. And so you can make that legal argument, and that God lets everything play out through free choice, and he knew the fallen angels were going to do it because he's Alpha Omega,
Yes.
right? So, and we do get different kinds of giants that show up after the flood, but from a biblical, without being that really tight legalistic argument, I think second incursion fits better than survival somehow, some way. So, but I'm still open to it because even though I make a strong case, even using 6:4 and other passages in book two, it's just I would prefer to have a Genesis 6:4 in the book of Genesis after the flood.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So what's your take? I know this might be a little
Oh,
controversial,
oh,
but
I'm sorry, I missed something with that. Just to interrupt.
sure
So
thing.
the technology to survive is the other thing that is interesting, because there's a thought that there was a technology they had with this high level of angelic technology that they could use sarcophaguses to put people in
Yes.
stasis or to heal.
That's what, yeah, I was thinking like with the Star Wars too with this, right?
Yeah. And so that's a possibility. That's with under the same bucket as angelic support because it's the technology that's going to be used that's supported by the angels to do it. So they could put
Yes.
that in Antarctica, they could put it underground, hidden
Oh,
places in other dimensions. And we get a lot of that theory supported in the occult entertainment and history. It talks about these chambers and healing
yes.
chambers. And our government tends to think that there was this technology as well, and they're trying to catch up with these healing beds, I think, is part of that technology. But
Yeah. Okay.
there is, if you know, a FOIA request that was done in 2017 or 18 from Hillary Clinton and her department and access to state uh, information. And there was a request that they put through that says requesting documents pertaining to the resurrection chamber of Gilgamesh in the location. Uh, uh, Let me just start that again.
Yep.
Pertaining to the resurrection of Gilgamesh, the location of his body, and the location of the buried Nephilim.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's FOIA number 2019021110, and I've got that for people, and that's got a little bit more information on that side. So,
Of
and
course,
if
it's
people want to get
redacted.
a hold of me, I'll send you these links. And so, if Hillary Clinton, working for the ones who control the world, so to speak, is
Right.
interested in Nephilim sarcophagus and bodies. They're interested in DNA and somehow creating a Jurassic Park type of giant and
Yes.
or the technology that these giants had to heal themselves. So do we have anything biblically that would suggest that giants can heal themselves?
Right.
And we do, but you got to work at getting there. So and we got have nothing with that would refer back to the Nephilim before the flood. And I would distinguish Nephilim before the flood with Rephaim after the flood.
Okay.
But with the Rephaim after the flood, we get some interesting connections. And in book 2, I'll get into the Ugaritic texts that is terrific support for the biblical history and definitions and words because it's the original Semitic vowelless before, you know, in the original, and then there's been vowels inserted over time. That is the source language for Hebrew. So you get a lot of the same
Hmm.
words that would be the same vowelless Hebrew in the beginning because it's vowelless Semitic languages. So like,
Right.
you know, things like MPL, like for Nephilim, and GBR for Gibberim, and HRM for uh, Haram or Mount Hermon as a source word.
Right.
And so you can do some direct comparisons. So there's these dynastic kings in the Ugaritic texts that are part of the tribe of the Titanu. And these are dynastic giant demigods. They're the offspring of Baal and Anat after the flood versus El and Ashtaroth before the flood. And they create the RPM as the original Semitic is, and transliterated in other books as with the vowels put in as Rapiu and Rapiyum.
Hmm.
So if you go back to original Nephilim as it would be understood in the original Hebrew, it would be NPL, and the H would have been put in as with the evolution of the Hebrew language. And so if you see the term Naphalim, that would be before the H even entered in. And the vowels have, but the H hasn't. Same for the RPM, Rephaim. And that's what these giants are. They're the offspring of the mother goddess and the father god and human females to create giants after the flood. And so they could, and they created all of the dynasties, all the royal dynasties after the flood. And there's a special council there, the Council of the Tanu, that reports to the assembly of the gods that we would have in Psalms 82 as that equivalent,
Yeah.
ruling over the 70 nations in Deuteronomy 32. Believe me, I go through detail and explanations on this in section 2 that nobody has gone this way and explained explained it in a manner and explains the oddity of different translations in Deuteronomy 32 of Israel, sons of God, and or angels. I link it all together. You just have to understand the language in Hebrew, and it all makes sense. There's no contradictions. It's just chosen way to translate it.
Right, right.
But I won't go into that now because I'm down a rabbit trail. So these are giants that are ruling, and Detanu is the same as Dedan in the Hebrew text as a people of Dedan. And the D and the T can be interchanged. And the Detanu is also the source word for the Tuatha De Danann, the Tuatha De Danann, the Shea people. And when you understand the D and the T can be used as the same letter or reversed as you go into different languages, then you understand that the Titans is the same thing as the Detanu or Detan as the Ugaritic text also has. And so you get these connections, but these Rephaim, they had the ability to heal themselves.
Wow.
And they could heal others in the Ugaritic text.
Yes.
Okay, so that's all nice, but do we get any of that in the Bible? Well, we sort of get some hints at it, in terms of how you want to kill them, take their heads off so that they can't repair themselves quickly. Right. And I go through that in book 2 in detail, but there's a word that's a source word for the Rephaim. It's 7495 in the Strong's Hebrew lexicon for the Bible, and it means to heal.
Wow.
And so if you get like an angelic name like Raphael, it means healer of God or God heals, depending on how you want to translate that. And so these are healers, and that's how the Ugaritic text prefers to translate these dynastic demigods as healers, as part of the Fisher King allegory in the cult or the priest king aspect. Now, what's also interesting about that word 7495 is Rapha, R-P-H-A in the singular, plural, if it was healers, understood it would be Rephaim, R-P-H-A-I-M. It's the source word for 7497. So it has some of the meaning carried forward as the source word, but not the full meaning. And then the additional information in the derivative Rephaim 7497 is a tribe of giants that were healers or could heal themselves. And then 7496 is also Rapha, derivative of 7495, and completes the understanding that these are evil spirits. These are demon spirits. These are the disembodied spirits of the Rephaim. So you put those ones together and you get the full meaning. And now you have the ability of these Rephaim to be self-healing and could heal others that you could take directly through Hebrew into the Bible. And these are the same disembodied spirits that Jesus was dealing with the unclean spirits and the evil spirits, and a word that is mistranslated, in my opinion, as devils. Typically, when we understand devil, we understand that for Satan as being diablos. And people use that to say, well, they're part of the angelic realm. They're like Satans, right?
Yep.
No, these are not. And the Greek word there isn't, something like a derivative of Satan as the Greek version is, or it doesn't, have anything that's going back to Diablos. It is the word daemon, the Greek word for English demon spirit. And these are the same thing as the sheds that are also talked about, or the shaddai, and other pronunciations of it, which are disembodied spirits as well in the Old Testament. So you have these circular supporting of this whole understanding of these disembodied spirits when their bodies, because they were limited to 120 years, decayed. God ensured with that violation that you wouldn't have a body that would live forever. The counterfeit spirit would live, but it would not go to sleep like humans do and go back to heaven. And then the soul and the body as part of that oiketerion, and I cover off oiketerion and the dwelling place for the spirit in book 2 as well for Christians, and that humans sleep, but the giant spirits aren't permitted to go to heaven, and they're not permitted to sleep. So they can only go 3 places. One is wandering the earth. Right. 2 is from an occult doctrine that they could find their way through rituals and knowledge. in death to find their way to the other world or Anwin or to Hades or Sheol to be where their gods dwell, because their
Right.
heaven is um, in the earth in another dimension. And then the other place is going to be the pit prison. And the most terrible of the Nephilim who were killed go to the pit prison. And they're called terrible ones. As Ezekiel 32 talks about. Now, I'll let you guys in because I could go forever on these long rants and connect King Og into these terrible ones, but you probably have a lot more questions than.
A few.
So I'll just, just the and that all led from this whole thing about, could they have a technology for the sarcophagus that healed themselves, or was it DNA, or was it both?
Hmm.
So that seems to be part of that occult mythos where the sarcophagus was a healing chamber, and the State Department and Hillary Clinton seems to think that that was real.
Right.
Can I ask a question about that? Do you
Go
think
for it, Cliff.
where do you think Hillary got this from? Do you believe, like, could she be talking to these spirits like with CERN, or do you think they're doing it on their own accord? Or are they looking for that because
Well,
that's what fallen
they
angels want?
they launched an investigation to find during the ISIS war, when that was going on, that and throughout the Trump uh, era of taking them out, which would have been a little bit later, but they were in there and in Syria going after all sorts of archaeological historical stuff that they wanted to save, but they really didn't save anything other than what they were specifically interested in. And I think they have, for a military basis and technology basis, they were interested in being able to re-engineer and create the ideal biological weapon of war, giants, and a technology that could help them live longer and maybe forever is what their belief system would be. So yeah, so we don't, we don't get much more of, her thoughts on that, but she received the information.
Something I found interesting is her code name was Evergreen.
Yeah.
And for me, what I've tapped into is I'm not sure how it interconnects, but what I can kind of determine with Nimrod's family dynasty
Yep.
is they kind of saw themselves as avatars, which is a big thing on social media now. Like create your own avatar.
Avatara would be the correct term.
Avatara.
Yeah, versus avatar.
Okay. Well, why did they add the A or why did they delete the A for us?
Yeah, and I didn't even know that was there. And so I actually, when I was doing a lot of research a few years ago and I was using Strong Cyclopedia, it has Avatar and Avatara in there. And I thought, well, that's odd. What's the difference? So
Right.
but it is the nuance is this, is that Nimrod, if he received a spirit from a fallen angel,
Hmm.
to give him more power and strength, he would be the Avatara. And it would be a symbiotic relationship with that being, but the avatar is the god. So this is a concept that is understood in Hinduism, and the best example for it is Vishnu, although Narasimha and Shiva, no, Shiva is also an avatar god as well.
Yeah, I'll add
And
on to where I'm
avatared
going
many
with that.
times.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so one of the times that Vishnu avatared into the world was with Buddha after Buddha was born, and gave Buddha the wisdom to create the Buddhist religion. And so it's a symbiotic relationship, whereas a demon possession is two spirits in one oiketerion, a soul and a body, and two spirits, and one is trying to suppress the other. And it tends to sort of show up in the body's appearance and everything that's sort of going on in that sort of possession. So it's
Right.
different than a possession. It's akin to, but not as powerful or as useful as what adepts would like to do is to bring in a demigod disembodied spirit, to give them more power as well. Now, they're inviting them in And they say they can control these demon spirits through rituals and magic words and things like that. I don't know whether that's true or not, or is it really all that symbiotic, or does that demon come in and just suppress the host? And you're really only seeing the demigod spirit unless he permits the other one to come up and speak. It's kind of like that Stargate thing, right? Where you have the Goa'uld
Yeah.
invading a human host body, and there's two in the same. And in the good version of the Goa'uld, the Tok'ra, I think as they were called, they would have a symbiotic relationship, and so the host could, interchange, and they would share the body.
Right.
But in the Goa'uld, they're suppressing the spirit.
That is crazy. Because what I'm tapping onto is I noticed the tree worship. Like I dug deeper into Jeremiah, and they
Yeah,
kind of believe in the regeneration, reincarnation, or symbiotic. Now that you've
yeah,
clarified that for me,
yeah, yeah,
um, and how they want to have their next empire from the Euphrates to the Nile, and the Star
yeah,
of Remphan
yeah,
connecting with the elements.
yeah,
With your thoughts with that, like what they have with the modern news narrative
yeah,
and Mithraism, like how he had his base of operations at the base of Euphrates.
yeah.
What do you think that's going to play out with like Shiva and doing the cosmic dance? Because every 6 points on that is equaling the, the son of perdition, destruction, nuclear stuff like you referred to.
Yeah. Well, the basic doctrine of Shiva is recreation through utter destruction.
Okay. Or order through chaos.
Yeah. So
Okay.
they have to destroy the old to make the new world. So we need to understand the destroyer concept of Abaddon, Apollyon, probably the equivalent title for the destroyer god Shiva.
Right. Right.
And that, I think that would be sort of from the book of Enoch, would be Azazel, who was the leader of the Watchers and the one who was put in the abyss as the leader,
Yes.
the abyss prison or the pit prison as the leader of the Watchers, and who was the destroyer of the antediluvian world, who's taught all the arts and crafts of war
Yes.
to a level of technology, as you sort of look into that either was going to destroy the world or wipe out all of humankind, which is their goal, is for the creation of the giants.
Right.
And the
Right.
flood comes along to stall that from happening. So now the evergreen tree, there's uh, two kinds of allegories in polytheism. There's the evergreen tree, which would represent immortality because it's always green.
Mhm.
And you have the sort of the broadleaf trees, generally speaking, or deciduous trees, that shed their leaves every year and then come back, and is an allegory for reincarnation. So they use variations of that thought process in their variations of their world tree. So you have, um, like a great oak tree or an ash tree or an elm tree, which is one version of the world tree. And then you have this evergreen as another, and it's representing connecting, heaven and earth together, but
Yeah.
not in the way that
We think, yeah.
we think, because the roots go into Hades or Sheol, where their gods are, where they get their power from and their genealogical roots from. So roll that forward. You'll be happy. Know that I cover this in more detail in book 2.
Oh, good.
Yeah, is that you have the genealogical tree, is the family tree that we see, right? As a double entendre, as also the world tree, and the branches are the genealogical bloodlines of the giants, and that all go back to roots, to a specific, well, and before they get into the ground, into the roots, to a specific Rephaim or Nephilim patriarch, but to a specific angelic, what I like to coin as, in sort of humorous, but it's sort of accurate too in the system that they have, to a specific patriarchal celestial mafia godfather.
I love it.
And so that's the taciturn imagery that's in the coat of arms, the unspoken language of the symbols. of their genealogies, and they introduced it. So then they were traveling from land to land. They would put a standard out with their coat of arms on. They could go into another nation, and they would completely understand the genealogies and where they fit in the hierarchy. Now, the evergreen tree is the cedar of Lebanon.
Okay.
And both of these trees are also called thelemic trees. And you'll hear that in some versions of Rosicrucian societies, but it's also the Greek word thelem for God's will, that they also pervert, translating a couple of times as sexually promiscuous, to put it mildly, in the New Testament. It should be not translated that way in those passages, but that's a different rabbit hole. And so the evergreen tree is the cedar of Lebanon, and in in the book of Amos, chapter 2, you have the cedars of Lebanon that are used in description of the Amorites as not as a metaphor, but as a
Allegory?
simile.
Simile. Okay.
Yeah, so it's not meant to be specifically accurate, but to denote the understanding that these were the giant trees of the forest. They could grow to be 100 feet tall and 50 feet round.
Whoa.
And they have a similar height to width ratio, 2-to-1, as the giants did, because they were stout and they were tall.
Wow.
And so now they take this evergreen tree and also the other trees that they talk about in Mount Hermon, and also you have the oaks of Bashan, so oak, ash, elm tree. You get those throughout the Bible as well, but it's really the elm tree which is the most sacred tree that they like to have for imagery for the genealogical tree, and then specifically the evergreen tree from Mount Hermon. And all of those trees grew in the Mount Hermon forest. Where they swore the oath to create the giants and where the assembly of the gods are located. So it's important.
Does that tap into the, like, when they have the groves under Ashtaroth or Asherah?
Yes.
I know is
Yes.
the root
Those
word.
are
Is
the
there some
groves.
sort of symbiotic oath or ritual you think that occurs via their sexual perversion of
That's
how
where
they think they're?
yeah. I mean, it's part of where they worshiped. It's part of where they had their sexual rituals and things like that. So it's very, very
Okay.
important. Cover that off in book 2 as well.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to this.
Oh, it's loaded with information. And now this evergreen tree has a different purpose. And it is used for their hierarchical organizational structure, particularly as you get into the secret societies and how they work the governments and things through those societies. So it's called the thelemic tree. And you have a large trunk that goes up and trunk organizations up that trunk. And then you have, with a cedar tree, the branches come down, right? So as you go back up, you have a ascending hierarchy that will be part of a joint or a branch into the trunk, a main branch organization that intersects with a specific trunk organization in the middle of the tree. So here's the trunk. And it goes from pretty mundane to really interesting. So you start with Freemasonry at the lowest level. And most people say, well, that's crazy. How could they be the lowest level? Well, it's in their degree system. Third degree is first level adept in the old system, and in the Scottish Rite they separate that 11 times, another sacred number, prime number for 33, and they're equivalent. And you don't know any secrets until you're an adept. The rest are just there for camouflage and
It's
look
sifting
like
out
they're
as well. Yeah.
and that the adepts can do what they please. So to be a regional manager, so to speak, of the various lodges, you have to be 5th degree in the old system. Okay. Illuminati is the next trunk up. So they work amongst the Mason lodges, and at the center of it, but would be one step higher and probably higher than 5th degree. So let's say at least 6 degrees in the old system. And they have a specific agenda. And so within the Freemasonry trunk area and the Illuminati, you have these branch organizations that are intersecting. So like in the Illuminati, you would have like Bohemian Grove, right? In the Illuminati, you would have Skull and Bones and various organs, and they go around the tree, and they all have a hierarchy that sort of extends down as that organization grows, right? Back
Yes.
to the original source organization. Above the Illuminati is the Rosicrucian order. And this is the intersection of pure bloods, pure bloodlines, with rising lower level of bloodlines from Freemasonry and Illuminati. And so the top 50% are from the Royals. And so they have a specific agenda. They look after the history of their world. They're heavily involved with the entertainment organizations, the writing guilds, publishing. They're there to preserve their genealogies. They're there to preserve their religious beliefs and their history. And the Illuminati and the Freemasons take a lot of their orders from the Rosicrucians. And as you move up above the Rosicrucians is the Committee of 300 Families. And you would have organizations intersecting in there like the Davos group, the World Bank, IMF, Club of Rome, although some people say Club of Rome would be one level higher. And then the next level is the Council of 33 Families.
So where was BlackRock fit on all that? And I asked for that because I know BlackRock is sacred. There's some sort of Abrahamic lore that was given to Abram. And that star somehow is sacred. That's what they have in Mecca with the Saturn cube. I'm curious.
So the Freemasons were responsible in their agenda. All these organizations have agendas.
Right.
They were given the responsibilities for influencing and controlling politics and the army. It's just another branch at that level, at depth level that are running it. Now they're heavily connected into the political arms of the democracies and that in the West. So that's how they're, they get access and funded and all of
so
these.
it's more of like
a
money laundering thing of a mafia. Okay. Yeah.
And it also makes sense that you have all of these Masonic generals and things like that. They're all part of the Freemasonry aspect. So, and it's kind of a reflection of the hierarchy of the angels, where you have archangels and Dunamis for the mighties and the Icarus for the mighty ones, as part of the military arm of the bloodlines as well. So you could see that also having influence from some specific bloodline families and they all have responsibilities within the bloodlines that reach down into different organizations where some of these major projects would sort of report to.
Gotcha.
And then above the Committee of 300 Families is the Council of 33 Families, and then the 13 Families. And that's just of the West. But the Chinese have equivalent type of secret societies with their bloodlines.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important to sort of understand that hierarchy, because pyramids just don't fit how you get so many different organizations. And so this allows many organizations to be intersecting within the trunk organizations. And now you can start to understand why Jesuits might not be controlling everything.
Gotcha.
They're a branch organization. And in book 2, I cover off the Jesuits, whereas I lay the foundations for the beginnings of the Jesuits in book 1. And I thought it was a bit of a distraction with all the disagreement out there as who the Jesuits are and how they fit in. They were put in as the New Templars. And I explained how that all gets set up. And it's pretty much a show in itself to talk about. So, and they're reinstalled through the Montesa order and Francis Borgia, part of the Pope Black nobility of the Julia gens of the bloodlines that control and produced at least, I think there's 3 Borgia popes, and his grandfather was one of those popes, and he was a Basque part of the Spanish court. And he and the king notice Ignatius, and he's also being jailed throughout the Inquisition. Ignatius of Loyola is, and Borgia, what he does is he bails them out of jail, and then he funds them, and then uses his connections to create the Jesuit order. And they're there to be the new Templars in the church, which they're trying to put back in since 1317, 10 years after the fall of the Templars, and weren't successful. This allowed them to do it. So what's interesting is you have a Grand Master of the Montesa order that's a bloodline Basque in the royal bloodline court, and he is going to become the 3rd Grand Master of the Jesuits in 1565. So, and they take that over, and by 1572, working with the King of Spain, they get control of the banking, and they've already had control of the schools. So, and they have their own agenda within the church.
Right.
And so they would report in, and you could make an argument that if they're reporting as a reinsertion by the lower Black nobility in the late 1800s versus the upper Black nobility in the 1500s, and the lower Black nobility would be like the bankers and the merchants of Venice and Florence that moved from Phoenicia. And so they're a different bloodline, and within Italy, not considered the true gens. They have a different gens that comes out of the Middle East. And so they're the ones who sponsored the reassertion of the Jesuits after they were taken down because they were at odds with the royals around Europe. They're assassinating them and stuff like that they didn't take too highly for. So they're disbanded. And so they were reinserted at the time of the resurgence of these Mary apparitions, and it's a Black nobility that they would be reporting to, but with that newer version, I think more to the Black nobility of the lower level, which would put them in the Committee of 300 versus the Council of 33. And that they were never in control of Freemasonry or Illuminati, but they had a special position that didn't fit in the trunk organization.
Gotcha. Wow. I don't know how you remembered all of that.
Oh, there's more. I could go on forever on it.
Cliff, you want to recap on that?
What is it?
I said, did you have anything you wanted to recap on that? Because that was a lot he just unpacked.
Man, I'm taking it all in, man. Gary Wayne. I mean, it's Gary Wayne, man. I'm just in.
And all of that's in book 2 and more.
Oh,
wow.
Okay, that's awesome. That's awesome. With the Hermetic Tree of Life, like you were talking about with the Kabbalah and stuff like that, there was something I was digging in when I translated that into Latin. At the very top, they have what was it? Kether in Hebrew, but when it translates, it's Corona.
Yeah.
So with that being said, what's your thoughts? Like, do you think that is what it's referring to in Revelation 18:23, that the nations were deceived by their pharmakia, the sorcery aspect? Do you think that has any connotation whatsoever?
With Corona? Well, it can also mean a crown too. And that's
Starlin, crown, spike.
Yeah. So yeah, there's definitely some sort of connection there with the naming of the virus to what they plan on doing with it. But I think they label everything they do with allegories and meanings and stuff like that. So, and it's it's a targeted type of virus. So if it was used for a bloodline purpose, then one would presume that it wouldn't make Royale sick. Right. But we don't really have any proof on that. But it's the pharmakia part that's important, because so you have pharmakia, you have pharmacus and pharmakos, as you get sorcery, sorcerers, and 3 different variations of the word, but they're all rooted in the same meaning. And it can mean magic spells, it can mean alchemy.
Oh, I did not know it tapped into that too. Okay.
Yeah, and which is the basis for pharmakia.
Right.
And pharmakeia is the root word for pharmaceuticals. And it's the pharmaceutical companies that make the vaccines
Yes.
and the other drugs, legal or otherwise. And so you can have this drug use that is going to be predominant in the end time, both from what we would look at legal pharmaceuticals and like all of these opium type of drugs that were kind of pioneered through the or the fentanyl products and all
Yeah.
of those opioids that are out there, and the mixing of that is pioneered through the pharmaceutical companies. So it says that Babylon deceives the world through her sorceries
Hmm.
in the KJV and or magic spells in some of the other English translations. And so, yeah, I think that is going to be a significant part. And again, if you look at what various organizations are doing to bring about world government and a world religion. And Babylon is more than just a religion, it's a city, it's also a political entity controlling
Hmm.
the 10 kings, and it is also a beast like system that's put in place for the Antichrist to take over and then probably take another notch up on.
Hmm.
And so we need to understand it in all of that level. So it's going to lead the world astray through her sorceries. And I think it's all of these vaccines and digital technology and things that are going to come down, and the illegal drugs that there's going to be able to control people with. Now, how that connects back into the B20, G20, Davos crew as they start linking back together here. They announced
Right.
in 2018, maybe 2017, that they see the implant system with digital technology, digital healthcare, and
Yeah.
digital other things being delivered through the healthcare system, because people will demand longer lives, yes, but they'll demand that they have a vaccine, so to speak, or protection from these diseases that are coming that they are creating.
Okay. So you could you see potentially like some sort of vaccine that prolongs your life and possibly connecting to Mr. Musk's Neuralink thing or some kind of health
Yeah.
like oh it gives you 3+ points of such and such to
Yeah.
your diet.
Yeah, I do see that. And, if
Okay.
you look at the corona, our mRNA technology, it's a digital technology. It's a messaging, but it's low level. It's not where they want it to be. And they want to get this down and into people's bodies at a level that is on a digital basis that can also get right down to the DNA and quantum level and go interdimensionally as well.
Right.
So now when you look at um, Elon Musk and this what do they call that? What does he call that link? Hyperlink or something like whatever the
Yeah.
link is. That
Neuralink.
Neuralink, that's what it is. That you can
Right.
communicate with a digital technology and down the road with humans. And Davos said that within 5 years, 10 at the outside, they're going to have links for brains that you can link with people all around the world. And now you're getting into this sort of hive mind mentality, right? Um, so it's part of that whole interconnection that they want to recreate. And imagine the allegory that they're using for this hive mind.
Hmm.
Um, and it's very, very similar to the Borg. But let's just use the Anjou allegory of the bee and the hive. They
Okay.
have fleur de lis that can also be understood as a bee in their belief system.
Hmm.
And in a beehive, you have a queen of heaven.
Oh, I didn't think about that
You
aspect. Okay.
have the drones underneath, which are the male gods, and then you have the worker bees, and they all work together in a hive mind mentality. They can communicate telepathy. And it's their belief system, and particularly out of the Anjou, and I cover this off in the book as well, is that they believe that they once had that hive mind capability and they want to bring it back. And it's working in like mind, as they call it, just as Antichrist will receive power from the 10 kings at the midpoint of the last 7 years in Revelation 17, when the 10 kings acting with like mind hand their power over.
Wow.
Right now, let's look at what they believe that this hive mind could do is that when they were giants and they had their ancestors were giants, and when they had this hive mind, they could work together and do things that you could not do on your own. So the access in this new type of hive mind, a technological hive mind, it'll have limited access depending on who you are,
Right.
and probably complete access as you go higher up into the hierarchy. So it's really interesting to understand that, because one of the things, and again, I talk about this in book 2, is that Israel goes up against all of these hybrid giants, 7 to 9 feet tall, known as Amu, Shamau, and Shazu by other organizations. We would know them as, Amalekites versus Amalekim. We would
Right.
know them as Amorites. We would know them as anything that's a tribe of hybrids created from humans and giants versus humans and angelic beings. So they're smaller, 7 to 9 feet tall. The Raphaim would have been 10 to 19 feet tall.
Wow.
The largest we get in the Bible would be Og on a royal cubit. He'd probably be 14 or 15 feet tall. But Gilgamesh was 11 cubits tall, and
Right.
he's also recorded in the Ugaritic text with the same dimensions and 4 cubits wide. So he was 19 feet tall as king of Uruk and 7 feet wide. Og would have had, almost a similar type of ratio, but 2 to 1 is usually the standard that people would say most of the giants were, that if they were 12 feet tall, let's say like Achilles or Orontes, he'd be 6 feet wide. So if you're 14 feet tall, you would be 7 feet wide. So if you look at that iron bed of 9 cubits and 4 cubits wide, I would probably put Og, if I would specify it, although he could be a little bit taller, he would have been, in just using the 7 feet wide as the parameter, you double that, that would make him 14 feet tall versus 15 feet tall. He could be as tall as 15 feet, but
That's crazy.
yeah. So anyways, these giants that Israel is going to go up against, they have iron, they have all the weapons of war, they have chariots, they have horses, and the Israelites don't even have a place to make weapons. Right? They don't have any manufacturing plants, and they're going to take on these giants. And God promises a few things. He's going to have the angel of the Lord there, the Ark of the Covenant, but he also says he's going to deliver up through these avenues the giants to them, so that they can just walk up to them and literally whack their heads off with a sword and make sure they don't recover.
Hmm.
How do they do that? Well, one of the ways that is mentioned 3 times in the Bible of how they're going to discombobulate these massive giant armies is with hornets. And that's really interesting. And I thought, hive, hornets, I'm going to do a little research on hornets. It's the natural enemy of the bee.
Wow.
And so now you start to understand how they're able to defeat these armies if they followed God's ways.
That's crazy. One thing I was wondering with Revelation, when he's talking about locusts, is that possibly referring to like locust drones that we got? And he just was like, crowns of men, that's the wings spinning. Like,
Yeah.
I'll just put locusts. So somebody will figure that out. Do you think that has any connotation with like the
Yeah.
telekinesis linking of that kind of stuff?
So, and you're referring to the beings coming out of the pit prison, or the beings in the 200 million man war?
I think I'm referring to the ones coming up out of, because they're
Yeah.
saying like for 5.5 months, people couldn't even take
Right.
their lives if they want to. I
Good.
think that has
Okay.
something to do with the telekinesis aspect.
Yeah, a lot of people thought that was technology. I would say the creatures that are in the 200 million man war would be more technology. These are beings that are coming out. This is the pit prison for fallen angels
Yeah.
and for demon spirits, the worst of them, the terrible ones. And so one of the things I do in book 2 is I put a column up on the left side is the description. This is in section 6. as I transition into end time prophecy, I put up a description as how these beings are described in the Bible in Revelation 9, each little item. And then I'm talking about these other beings out of prehistory that are called the Girdabalu or the Akrabamalu. And a crab is the Hebrew word for scorpion. Yeah. And, and Akrabamalu is a term that comes out of Mesopotamia. So the description that I put in on that comes out of Sumeria, and same descriptions out of Central America as well for the same type of being. I put it side by side with the scorpion beings that are coming out of the pit prison, and they're identical. And now these
Wow.
Akrabamalu were said to be created by Tiamat in the Sumerian pantheon, other types of mother gods in other pantheons, as beings that were to protect them from the offspring gods, because the offspring gods in occult mythology and history say that they killed off the parent gods. You can't kill something immortal. So
Right,
that
right,
didn't
right.
happen. They went to the pit prison. Just as the offspring gods, if they did the same crimes after the flood, like creating giants, and I think they did, they go to the pit prison as well. They're not killed like Baal is recorded as being killed. They're imprisoned, and other angels move up in the angelic armies. Saba host, it means an army, so they just move up in rank and order. And so these are beings that are created, probably just part of the hierarchy as opposed to being created and drafted in to protect the palaces, protect the temples, and protect the ways to the underworld, and to ensure that the offspring gods can't overthrow them.
Wow.
Okay, so they have the ability to destroy the world in occult mythology. And these are fallen angels, but they're not like a degraded seraphim angel like the goat gods are. Like
Right.
Azazel is a watcher angel and a leader and part of the Satans and a seraphim angel. And so they're degraded to goat god status for their crimes.
Right.
And that's where the satyrs come from. So I started looking into the idea, well, are these things kind of another degraded watcher?
Hmm.
And if you look at one of the warrior kinds of angels that guarded temples, thrones, the palaces,
Right, right.
guarded Eden, you have the cherubim. And I'll make the case that I think these are degraded cherubim watchers as part of the hierarchy that rebelled and also violated the laws of creation. And I don't take that out to its fullest extension. Maybe in book 4 I might do that. But they have 4 different faces. So they would take one face when they created an oikotarian for themselves so that they could interact physically, or dwelling place for their spirit, a soul, and a body.
Mhm.
And in the Middle East and in Sumeria, you have these Anunnaki, which are watchers
Right.
that also created gods. And they're depicted on reliefs with some with a human head and with wings and big, stocky, strong legs and arms and things. And they're doing this
Right.
ritual around this sort of technology tree that some people say is some form of tree of life. Whatever it is, doesn't matter. And in other depictions, you have the exact same depiction, and they have a bird face or an eagle face.
Yes.
Well, the cherubim has a human face, it has a bird face, it has a lion face, and it has a bull face.
I'm familiar with
So,
that.
yeah.
Wow.
So now, if you imagine that
Wow.
these watchers, let's say, took a human face, and as in Mesopotamia, you get giants that are described like Gilgamesh are
Mhm.
and Nimrod, black hair, curly black beards. And they go through Syria and parts of Greece. These are part of the Indo-Aryan giants, and that they're different than the blonde-haired and red-haired variety of blue eyes and hazel eyes and white skin. These Mesopotamians also have pale white skin, just different color of hair. And they seem to be a little bit larger, like Og was the last of the Rephaim after the flood, giant Hebrew Rapha. And he's taller. So they're seemingly from a different kind of watcher. And then you start to look at Southeast Asia and China. They have Tengu gods, which are watcher gods. They have dragon Tengu gods. They have dog Tengu gods like Anubis, for example. You have dog gods like, and you have bird gods as well that are Tengu. And they produced offspring in those accounts. And best found in terms of detail in the Japanese history, and they call them Tengu, warriors and priests. And these were giants that taught all of the martial arts that you would get the ninja from, and the
Wow.
all of that martial art thing that goes along with the Japanese sort of history. And you get the Xibalba to the Popol Vuh, which are owl-faced giants. And there was another one that's the Camazotz, the House of Camazotz, which is a branch of the Xibalba. And they're known as the House of the Bat. And if that sounds interesting, Google Camazotz, C-A-M-Z-O-T-Z, and you're going to get this outfit that the Batman wears, basically.
I was talking about that in college, then the teacher was looking at me like, wow. And I'm like, yeah, it's kind of interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. So depending on what type of head they chose, if they reproduced, they would produce giants like that. So now it starts to say, okay, well, what about the lion men of Moab? And the lion-like men that were mighty ones of Gad, and Arioch, which means lion-like, one of the four giant kings coming out of Mesopotamia in the Genesis 14 War of Giants.
Wow.
So I'll expand on that in book 4, but I just sort of laid down some of those sort of thoughts in terms of that these are degraded watchers, and these are probably the degraded cherubim that are going to come out and have this power to destroy the world.
That's crazy. So when you were talking about the Azazel thing, there's a part that I frequently refer to in one of your first book, I think it's chapter 30, and you're referring to the Emerald Tablets, and there's like 2 towers and stuff like that.
Yep.
And I immediately was thinking of the Twin Towers because that was very significant. I was like, Twin Towers, that's interesting. And then I was digging into the trade and how a lot of our language is the language of the sea.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts with that, with Solve on one side, which is to bring something into existence, and then Coagula, which means blood clot, and that connecting with the pentagram as the middle? Do you think that's like 3 phases for the Antichrist ascension on the Baphomet?
Yeah, when you've got that 2 pillars, it can mean a lot of things, right?
Okay.
It could be a portal entrance, and
Yes.
typically seen like in a fairy dolmen where it's got an archway with a rock on the top made out of rocks, or triptych type of architecture. Similar thing. Now there's just 3 portals in one location. So it could be looked as that. It could be looked at the 2 pillars of Lamech and Enoch and some of the allegories, where the last is, and that's the lost antediluvian knowledge, the angelic technology. It's also shown in 2 pillars of Freemasonry, and again, several different meanings aligned with that. It's also representing the dualism of polytheism, which is, good versus evil on the micro level, and white hats and black hats all leading humankind to the same destination. Just cattle herding us in that direction. Or the perpetual good versus evil as their god, Lucifer, great architect of the universe, Satan, Hallel, as equal to God, and that it's a different understanding of how things play out in the future than monotheism. And so you have that, but then you have that little pentagram or symbol, sometimes seen also as a blue circle or a red circle, or as a horn. And it's that horn that is kind of interesting, because the unicorn is an allegory for that's understood in the occult bloodlines as being from a single horn sort of bull, right? As we understand, the word rem is the word for a wild bull, and a unicorn would be some sort of single horned bull as it's sort of understood in occult understanding. So you have that word wild bull that is translated as unicorn into the KJV Bible instead of saying wild bull. And we have an imagery that this unicorn is this playful little horse type of thing that didn't, was so playful and distracted that it missed its calling to go to the ark. Well, it was never called to the ark because it was a chimera type of being. And these horses were created to be the weapons of war that the giants rode on into battle. And they had a
Oh,
version
wow.
before the flood and after the flood. So I cover this off in book 2 as well. You'll be happy to know. It's also an allegory for the cherubim as being the ones who pull the chariots of the gods. It says cherubim. So it's an angelic being, and it's also a mythical horse, or probably more accurate. I believe they probably did have giant horses. Otherwise, they couldn't ride into battle. Like they'd squash the horse, right?
Right. Yeah.
So
This was immediately what I was thinking earlier
they'd
when you
have
were
to have
talking about that.
something. Yeah. So now this cherubim in the occult, that's also understood as a unicorn being, channels divine knowledge to its followers.
Hmm.
And this is that third eye.
Yes.
This is the horn. Now, in prophecy, you have in Daniel 7 the Beast of Empires, and in the Beast of Empires, you're going to have these 10 horns, and then there's going to be a horn that grows up. And then Daniel 8, you have a different kind of prophecy reflecting the single horn again.
Yes.
That's a unicorn that they're inserting in there instead of wild bull. And what's interesting about the mighty Prince James, the Gabor Royal James, who had the divine right to rule, that he
Yes.
said he claimed that would come from a specific god on Mount Hermon, that he would swear that oath to in their oath-based society.
Right.
Between him and probably Bacon are the ones that changed the word from wild bull to unicorn, because guess what he has on his coat of arms?
Unicorn.
A unicorn. That would be a cherubim watcher as part of his pedigree.
Wow. I was just thinking about the little horn when you mentioned that as and the slaying the bull. I think that connects with Mithraism. There's got to be a connection there.
And then Antichrist will have knowledge nobody else has.
Right.
As well, as you connect more of the allegories in there. But you get sort of the idea as to where that goes with all of that.
Right. Well, what you were talking about, with like having knowledge above everybody else, because I was digging into some 666 is the number of the beast, 616 is the number. And you just clicked this for me when you were talking about the skull and bones. 3 times 22, it equals 66, or 33 times 2 equals 66. And the 1 is of the beast, 616. So I think the third eye ascending, the non-eagle, the slaying of the bull. In Mithraism, you just connected a whole bunch of dots for me.
Well, and now consider that the word Nephilim is defined as being a giant, a tribe of giants, a tyrant, and a bully. And that most people just say, well, I mean, it doesn't mean giant. It could mean a bully or a tyrant. Well, two things on that is that the Herculides kings from Hercules, son of Alchemy and Zeus, a giant, created Gyges and Gyes kings, giant kings. Should take that back to Greek. And they were known as tyrannos, tyrant, giant kings. And in Anatolia or Asia Minor with the Hittites, they were known as tyrannos, same word with an A instead of a Y. And so tyrants is another term for giant kings because they were tyrants. And now the word bull, they were bullies, yes, but not in the normal sense of the understanding of a bully. They probably acted as we would understand a bully today, where the term comes from. But
Right.
the gods were called bulls in the Ugaritic text and other religions. And their offspring, the Rephaim, were called bulls. So when you see the bulls of Bashan, they could be representing both the offspring of fallen angels and or the fallen angels themselves. And of course, Bashan is in the Mount Hermon region.
Right. Wow, that is crazy.
Gary, let me ask you, like all your books you wrote exposing all this stuff, do you feel like empowered by God? Do you feel like you're doing God's work?
I hope so. Yeah, I do. I do, but I try not to dwell on that. I'm thankful for having the opportunity to do the research and being able to get that information out and to speak on it. So I'm humbled by that. And even though I talk about things that, for most of the standard hierarchical organization of Christianity would make their hair stand up and I would be called a heretic, I do everything from the Bible. I
Yep.
mean, and I make my case from the Bible. And so I'm hoping that the work that I'm doing is helping people prepare for what's coming, because we can't imagine it. As bad as we think it's going to be, it's going to be
Yep.
worse because we can't imagine what's coming. And the only way it could adequately be described is it will be like the days of Noah. It's that bad.
With that being said, what's your take on rapture, prophets, and stuff like that? I know it's me, I don't care either way. It's like I'm okay to die for my savior, and the other one is like I hope so. But
Yeah.
what would be your personal take with, like, what Isaiah was saying, God forbid the giants come back, or we being here for that?
Yeah.
What's your timeline, or where do you think that all would fit in,
Um,
if it does?
yeah, no, there's a lot of scripture on the rapture.
Right, right.
Although technically you don't get that word. You have words that produce the English word through
Exactly what I
etymology
wanted to
of
break down
rapture.
for
Yeah.
folks. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a document on that for people if they want it. So,
Okay.
um, so my first sort of superficial response to it, or the headline response to my view on rapture, is A, I believe in it.
Okay.
B, I pray for pre-trib. I prepare for mid-trib. And so the reason why I think we need to prepare ourselves is so that we don't lose our faith if it doesn't work out, that we're going to be
Right.
saved from
Yes.
things. And one of the things I can't do is ignore inconvenient passages. And I can't ignore what Jesus said,
Right.
or the chronological order that he lays things down in it. And the easiest way to start arriving at preconceived ideas for eschatology is to start reinventing what things say. So a lot of people might say, well, the end time events that Jesus is talking about isn't in chronological order. It's in a topical order. Really? Did you just say that? Is what I'm thinking in my mind. And I said, what do you think about that word then? And he says, and then this happens, and then that happens. Well, that's got nothing to do with it. I said, well, what do you
Right.
think about putting the abomination in the middle of his events as a marker and going to study the book of Daniel when the midpoint of the abomination which is the midpoint of the last 7 years, as Daniel 9:27 lays out the last 7 years.
Mhm.
And then I say, one of the things I like to do is I like to take the translations back to the original language. So in this case, Greek, and that's the Greek word toda. And it means then. It's the when. It's the chronological thing. It's exactly how it was translated in that case. So
Nice.
why would you try and correct what Jesus said? Right. And then people will say, I'm going to take what Jesus said and define it what Paul said. Oh, I don't think that's a good idea. But everything around what Jesus said, they're just adding more information to it. And then they'll say, well, you can't put Jesus' chronological order around the book of Revelation. I'm going, well, no, I don't do that. I put the book of Revelation around what Jesus said, of course. And I said, you can understand it because it's written in a chronological order if you just sort of look at how it's written.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's broken in with the churches, and not all the prophecies that are provided in the seven churches are fulfilled in that period of time. Some of them are for the end time. So
Right.
it's one of those things that I cover off in book 2 that I call a dual prophecy. It has important prehistory, it has events for the time of the prophet, and then it has specific end time applications. So Isaiah 14 is a classic one to understand that properly. Ezekiel 32 is another one. Ezekiel 28 is another one. And there's several, and I identify some of them, not all of them in the new book, because the Bible doesn't contradict itself. So if it said it was
Right.
going to happen, it's going to happen. If it didn't happen in the time of the prophet, and it's got Antichrist references to it, it's probably an end time application for that aspect.
Right.
And things like the king of Babylon never raised his throne to heaven, or tried
Right.
to. He had no capability of doing it.
Right.
Or Tyrus never walked in Eden, or amongst the fiery stones in heaven.
Right.
Just those aren't possibilities. So you have to understand that those are characters that are in the time of the prophet, and aspects of what is said is true, but what isn't, there's a different meaning to it. I won't go through the meanings of each of those dual prophecies today, but and in the seven churches, you have things like 10 days of tribulation. Well, isn't that interesting? That's the Greek word thlipsis. And it's the same word for tribulation in Revelation 7 that come out of the Great Tribulation. And so it's the same word as the Great Tribulation in Matthew 24:21. But that's a different tribulation than the tribulation of the saints in Revelation 7. It's a second half tribulation. And the word afflicted in the first part of Matthew's oratory there is the Greek word thlipsis. So where you're having people handing over, it's a tribulation of the saints before the abomination. That's the saints that come out of the great tribulation that starts before the last 7 years, as 10 days is 10 years.
Yes.
And then the rise of Babylon. And then you have the great tribulation not seen since before creation as it's defined. And people will say, well, if the right translation for Matthew 24:8 was properly done with afflicted, then your case falls apart. Okay, I get that. I don't always agree with what the translators do, but then I sort of look at things like, well, what about Mark's version? So Mark's version, I think it's in about Mark 13, about 19. It's talking about this great tribulation, this great affliction that's not seen since the beginning of creation that happens and is a parallel cognate passage to the tribulation in Matthew 4:21, but he uses affliction. And that's the Greek word thlipsis.
Wow.
It just hasn't been translated consistent enough. So we need to prepare for 10 days of tribulation. And there's a tribulation of the saints. And then there's another tribulation. And the people going through it who weren't raptured, they have to earn their salvation through fire.
That's
right?
terrifying.
Yeah, it's terrifying. Now, what's also interesting is we're only told two promises. One is in the book of Revelation, in Revelation 3, as I recall, and the other one is in Thessalonians and a couple other passages as well, but you'll be familiar with them. One is we're going to be saved from the Lord's wrath, right? So what people do is they conflate thlipsis with wrath, and it's like, no, they're different Greek words. It's like orche and thumis, and they're used to describe the wrath bowl, Armageddon time of the year of the Lord's wrath, the wrath bowls. And in the Old Testament, we get terms like the year of the Lord's wrath. There's a year of the Lord's wrath that happens in the last year before the year of the Lord's favor, which happens after the rapture, which happens after the rapture, and also the rapture happens after the midpoint of the last 7 years. So you get this sequence of events that start to sort of line up. And the other thing that we're promised is in Revelation 3 is that we're going to be saved from the hour of temptation or trial, depending on which translation that you're reading. And that church wasn't saved from that. So that's an end time prophecy. And so that's the Greek word hora. And it's hour. And it's used in translated as last times in the epistles when it's talking about the time of the multiple antichrists, right? When Jesus tells us after the abomination, many are going to come in his name. He tells us that before as well, but there's another specific period that lines up. That's the same word, hora. Should be hour, not last times. Either I'm good with either, but it doesn't give you those connections that you need to connect the Bible together with. This is the hour that is described in Revelation 17, that the 10 kings hand their power over to Antichrist. That's at the midpoint of the last 7 years. It's the same hour, hora, that Babylon is described as being destroyed. In the summary to the last 3.5 years, in about Revelation 14, 8 or 9, after we see the last of the first fruits in heaven as part of the resurrection sequence for the first fruits. These are the martyred saints, the same as the ones that came out of the tribulation. And the ones that are seen in Revelation 6 are told that to wait for, right? This is the same hour that we're told Babylon is destroyed in an hour in Revelation 18 as part of those details. It's after the gospel has been preached by the angel in Revelation 14. It follows immediately after. And then Babylon is destroyed as the first major event of the last 3.5 years. So you get the exact main event summary and then the details as you go through to Revelation 19. This is the hour that's reserved that Jesus talks about when he comes back. So I pray, and there's a lot more to the position than that, but so I pray for pre-trib, but I prepare for mid-trib because I can't ignore all of these passages. And people say, well, but John went up in rapture. It's an allegory for rapture. Well, it doesn't say that.
Right.
And he did come back because he had to deliver the scrolls to the churches. So he wasn't transformed. True. And he went there in vision. They say, well, no, he wasn't in vision. It says twice that he was in vision, maybe more, that he was seeing all of this in a vision. He didn't actually go to heaven. I mean, the ways that things get reinvented is problematic. So if you have to twist scripture or you have to leave out inconvenient passages, there's a problem. And so I hold myself to that standard. And if I can't handle every passage that is provided to me in prophecy, I have to rethink my position and adjust it. And I did in the beginning, but after a while, you get the pattern and nothing becomes in conflict. Everything just fits in like a jigsaw puzzle. It's just another piece. But if you don't put all the pieces in there, you got holes.
Well, Gary, does a lot of Christians how do Christians feel about your work? Like, do you get hate mail and stuff? Like, people don't want to hear this stuff? Like, I think it's so important. I mean, the work you've done, I mean, it's amazing, but how do people receive it?
I get both hate mail and fan mail. But I will, if the people that are contacting me want to actually have a legitimate debate, I'm prepared to do that, and so I will engage in that. But if it's just hate and they're not really wanting to, have a legitimate debate, or what I would call a lot of the occultists do or the polytheists do, and I see it happening in Trent, that is part of the prophetic side as well, is they do a chase the rabbit argument. And so they'll say, well, what about this? And it's either from an occult perspective designed to shed a wedge in faith, or from within the church to try and get you to not be able to answer a question to justify their position. So in both cases, the responses are always the same, which is very curious to me because they use the same tactics. So when I answer the question, then they go, well, what about this? And I'm going, well, you haven't answered the last question. Well, answer this then if you're so smart. So I do. And then they say, what about this? And I say, well, you haven't addressed my responses yet. And then they say, what about this? And so what I do is I say, I'll let them do it for a couple of times. And I'll say, okay, I understand what you're doing. This is chase the rabbit. I will answer a few more questions, but unless you address what I say, I'll end it at a certain point because we're not having an exchange of ideas. You're just trying to get to ask enough, what about this, so that I might have missed something. And because I couldn't answer that single one, my whole sort of
kind of entrap you
is,
in a sense.
Is all, yeah. So you have to be aware of that. But where people, for the most part, it was a lot of hate in the beginning. Now it's gone heavily to more of people saying, you know what, I just really like your approach. I really like how you explain things. I have some questions. I would really appreciate some help on understanding this or understanding that, or how do you handle this passage? Whatever the question is I get back to people on it. Whatever document that they want, if I've got it, I will get it to them. It may take me, I'm out 2 months on responses right now. I'll get that back to 3 to 4 weeks. I was absolutely taken kind of off the market for the most part between shows and mailing books out for the launch of book one. And by the way, I got, all but one 5 stars so far on it for the ratings out there on Amazon. And the one who gave it a 4-star was, she didn't like the font size. So, so I guess that's pretty good so far on the criticism. But I'll get, like on book one, I got some real nasty reviews and hate on those reviews on book one early on. And now it's, heavily weighted, because people are starting to, when they read the information, you don't have to agree with everything, especially, and I'm not, like in book one, I'm not looking for people to agree with everything that was written in there, because I'm saying things or just quoting things and referencing things that the polytheists are saying. Right. I'm not necessarily saying I agree with that. So whether or not you believe that's what they believe or not, I don't care. What's important is that they believe what they're saying. And it's what they're doing with that belief that's really important. So, yeah, I really enjoy doing the back and forth and answering questions for people. And all I'm trying to do is provide information. You decide. But if you're tired, like in my eschatology approach, which is, and that's why I put it in the preface of book 2, there's just hard guidelines that I use, right? It's just keep me on the right track. And everything's got to sort of fit. And so what it does, what I tell people is, if you want to take the conflicts out and you want to have a way that allow you to fit pieces in, then maybe consider this. You don't have to accept it. But if you were like me, and when I got into the prophetic side in a big way, I couldn't understand why there's all these different approaches and they're all quoting from the Bible. Like, what am I missing here? They all can't be right. And then I sort of flipped it around and saying, well, what's the common pattern here in terms of what's missing in the approach that they're taking? And it starts with their preconceived conclusion, and then they do all sorts of things to justify it. And it just doesn't have to work that way.
Wow.
I had one more question, if I may. So I know
Absolutely.
you've mentioned before, I think it might have been Encrypted or one of the other ones I was listening to that you were on. You were stating how Moses's body had to be fought over because of the pre-term and stuff like that. So if that is the case, what's your thought on the Elijah, Enoch, or Moses for the 2 prophets in the last day? Do you think that's not even relevant? Do you think that's supposed to fulfill that every man is appointed unto death, and the 2 that were brought up somehow come back to bring everything full circle? What's your take on that?
Yeah, so I mean, I would go with what I think the book of Hebrews says: everybody's appointed to one death,
Yes,
and then the judgment, and we're all going to be judged, even though we're going to be resurrected. But the point is you're going to the second death after that, or to immortality, or for those in the last 3.5 years for worshiping Antichrist and taking the mark and worshiping Satan. won't be going to the lake of fire forever. So I apply that to who these two witnesses are, because they're killed. They're slain by the one who comes up out of the abyss. So that means that's their first death.
Right.
And they're also witnesses, which means they saw with their own eyes. And so you can make an argument they're angelic beings, but you can't kill them. And then they also have their own resurrection, right? At the midpoint. They're part of the last of the first fruits, the two witnesses.
Right.
So who could they be? And there's not very many candidates that were provided biblically. So I think you can make a good case for at least three for sure. One would be Enoch, who was taken to heaven, and he would be a perfect witness of the antediluvian world.
Right.
That sort of fits. Elijah would make a terrific witness of the Holy Covenant and the things that happened in Israel and the Baalim and dealing with these types of individuals. And he would make a very good witness. And he's said to be the one who's going to make the way for the Messiah in the book of Micah, or I mean, not the book of Micah, last book of the Bible, Malachi. And then there is, maybe a couple other ones that people might want to consider. And this is comes from the disciple that Jesus loved. Right? So that's at the end of book of John, even though we get that term in other gospels. And so the disciples are very perplexed about the disciple Jesus loved. And he said, why should he live forever? And he's saying, it's not that I'm saying he's going to live forever, but if I want to keep him alive till I return, what is that to you? So somebody who was witnessing Jesus's commission and wrote it all down as he's recorded as doing. And the disciple that Jesus loved isn't there when Jesus ascends. Is not listed there, which is kind of odd. So another one that Jesus loved, and I make a case for this might be Nathaniel, but whoever it is, in book one, I make that case and give my reasons why. But it could also be from one aspect of somebody that Jesus loved as a male was Lazarus, but he raised him from the dead. And he already had his first death. So would he? So I'm open to that, but I think probably not. Now, we also have a passage that comes out of the book of Micah, and a couple of passages where the breaker is going to free the lost tribes in Israel and Judah from around the world in preparation for second Exodus after the rapture. And there's going to be 7 shepherds and or 8 principal men. Well, who are these 7 shepherds? And so Elijah could be one of those 7 shepherds. So then if you have him as part of leading the way for Messiah and the second Exodus, then he might be placed there versus the 2 witnesses. Because they're not 3 witnesses, but the different candidates that I have narrowed it down to in my research. So I think they're all going to be here. It's just where do they fit?
Yeah.
Now you could also make an argument. Well, Enoch doesn't have to be here. I mean, he walked with God and he was transformed. Okay, I get that. That's a possibility. Or Elijah, you could make that case. He was transformed as well. But the 2 witnesses die. And then they're resurrected after 3 days. And that 3 days is no fluke. I mean, this is the same 3 days that Jesus spent in the grave.
Okay, so it's not years equation. It's actual literal 3 days.
That would be 3 days by the context. And it's the same Greek word, but that Greek word has multiple meanings. So you have to watch the context. So I think, I mean, you could say that they would be raised after 3 years. That could fit in with the second Exodus.
Right.
You could make that case. I just think that the world is in absolute astonishment after celebrating like Christmas, so to speak, in a great feast and celebration with the death of these, when they suddenly are shocked that they arrived. The text just sort of says literal
They
3
wouldn't be
days
as
in this
shocked,
point.
right? Right.
Yeah, so context is very important in the understandings. But yeah, you could make a case that could be 3 years. I just don't think it fits perfectly. But I could make it fit in with other passages like the second Exodus. But it seems to me they're part of the first fruits. So for people who aren't familiar with that passage, it's about Jesus, the first fruits, and then when he comes, those who died in him, who are asleep but weren't martyred, and those who are still alive. And all of that comes together at the death of the two witnesses at the midpoint, at the 144,000 shown in heaven as first fruits, and in conjunction with those who come out of the great tribulation as martyrs, as first fruits, just as those ones in Revelation 6 were. Everything just starts to fit like a glove.
Right. Cliff, you got any questions?
No, I'm just taking it all in. That was amazing.
Well, that's all that I got. But one last thing I did want to recap is that in one part, this was on the earliest one you did with Cryptid. You were talking about how they were healers, and that immediately made me start thinking when they were mocking Christ upon the cross, and they're like, heal thyself, healer, yada yada. Is there any connotation with that being the place of Golgotha where they might have buried Goliath's skull?
Yep.
Do you
I
think
make a
there was
case
any?
that they do in book 2 as well.
Oh, I gotta really read this
Yeah.
already. You're making me mad. I didn't get more chapters in.
Well, it'll take a while to digest all the information. But anyways, what was the question again about the
So
healing aspect?
yeah, when they were going up to him, I know there's always the Hermetic tree
Yeah.
of life at the healing and whatnot in the Caduceus, but even just the aspect where they were kind of mocking him, like you've healed others,
Yep.
and the giants having some sort of connotation with healing.
Yeah.
Do you think there was an intentional alignment, hidden mockery in a
Sure there
sense that
is.
was going on with that line?
Yeah. Prove to us that you're something more than just a human,
Right.
and do the hubris and heal yourselves like giants would do.
Okay.
Yeah, all those details are important. Not just,
Yes.
I mean, they understood if he was the word of God, he could do more than heal himself. He
Mhm.
wanted to do it. And they also knew that his head wasn't chopped off at this point, that they
Yes.
could heal themselves. And there's an interesting passage as well. And I link beheading in book 2 as well, of where that comes from and how we see that done in the Bible, other than just with Goliath, but in other applications as well. And one interesting one that I don't really put, as I recall, into book 2, but it's an interesting quick story, is when Jesus is starting off on his commission. He's going to be baptized by John. So he's like an Elijah type of individual, but John is going to be thereafter very quickly captured and imprisoned, right? And what Herod does is have his head chopped off. Well, isn't that interesting? Right? Why would he have his head chopped off? Well, he's afraid because he has extra powers that he could be an Avatara, or he could have, or he could have a demon that he's working with that he has special healing powers. He wants to make sure he's gone and he does not come back. Okay. And people will say, well, that's a bit of an extrapolation. I agree, but understand the Herodians were royal bloodlines. They would understand this intuitively, but here's the interesting part of the story in the Gospels, is that after John is dead, he gets reports back to him about somebody doing as John did, baptizing, teaching, doing miracles, and he is in mortal fear. He has not understand how John the Baptist has come back after he has beheaded him. He thinks Jesus is John the Baptist.
Right. Wow.
And most people just sort of glance over that. I always, before I got into this kind of research, I just thought there's something there that it's in the Bible for a reason, but I don't get it. What are they referring to here? It's a really weird story, right? Some of these details. And just so the listeners will know what you were talking about when you were mentioning Moses when he died.
Yeah.
So just quickly on that is that Moses was adopted into the royals, part of the Egyptian beast kingdom. And as you go through book 2, you're going to understand that the beast kingdoms are all directly associated with Israel. And will be again in the end time with the 7th beast empire. And then the 8th beast empire of Antichrist. This is the first. And yes, you can also define that as Daniel 8. It's both. It's not one or the other. Okay. So I explain that in book 2 as well. And so he is raised in the royals, the Rephaim Pharaoh kings. And he is educated at Heliopolis. And he's sworn into all of these oaths. And he becomes a royal, adopted, even though Pharaoh didn't know he was, and that he is going to be an adept before he's even an adult as a royal, because they're initiated from childhood, as all royals are. So if you ever hear the term 32nd degree adept,
yes,
either have no idea what they're talking about, because most people think they're talking about a Scottish Rite adept. Well, that's 33rd degree, and you ain't adept until you're 33rd degree. But that is a term that the royals use, the bloodlines, because they're an adult before their childhood. They're not allowed to take the adept title. So they call themselves a 32nd degree adept, just slightly below, right? And between 25 and 30, they can take that title as an adept. So he swears his oath as an adept to the pantheon of gods that Satan heads, and he has legal oath-based rights to it, a legal tender. And so when he dies, Satan shows up. He wants the body, and he wants Moses because he has legal tender. He swore to worship him, and he's now calling in that marker. But God sends Michael to trumpet because he was there to be educated that way at his permission, so that he could carry out the great commission he was going to have after he had to go through the humbling aspect and come back to God. And then he could go back and speak in the language of the Egyptians to the royals, to the priests, and be superior to them. In worst case, equal, but in every case, he proves himself to be superior, but also with God's help to be superior on that aspect. So yeah, that has legal tender. And God doesn't trump everything. So don't go there because you will be held accountable for your oaths.
Absolutely.
As we're told throughout the Bible.
Wow. You know, I think we're going to name this episode "You Should Have Gone for the Head," because I kept thinking about Thanos the whole time you were talking, saying you had to chop off the head and they call him the Titan. And I'm just like, wow. And even Endgame, I'm like, they're literally throwing all of that at us. And you're telling me how significant it is that you have to chop off the head of the serpent in this sense. That is, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, Gary, thank you for coming on for the show. Is there any way that people can reach you with the emails and paperwork and links that you were recommending and getting your books?
Yeah, so the best way to get a hold of me or buy my book is through my website. That's the Genesis6conspiracy.com. And that's the number 6conspiracy.com. So you go to that website, and on that website, I have a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters of book 1 and 84 chapters of book 2. And if you think that's the whole book, you've not read one of my books before. It is a drop in the bucket. It does, and the information will not stop coming at you. And things we talked about today is just a drop in the bucket that's in book 2. So that'll give you an idea whether it's the right book for you or not. And if you decide that you'd like to buy a book, you can go to the Buy Now page and you can get a signed copy directly from me. And I have a page for Canada, I have a page for the US, and the page for everywhere else in the world, and there's separate pages for each. And if you want to buy multiple books, there's discounts. And if you wanted to buy one of each, I've not been able to get that bundled through Stripe yet. So order, let's say, one of each. or 4 of each, however you want to buy the quantity of that in one. Send me an email saying how you want them signed and how you want them split in terms of book 1 or book 2, and I will do that for you to provide you the discount. And that's just the discounts I save on shipping. So I pass it all back on. And from that website, you can link over for the Kindle edition. If you want the digital version, to Amazon. You can also link over to Amazon.com, Amazon.ca, and BarnesandNoble.com. That takes you right to the book. They'll probably be a little bit less money than I am. My publishing agreement says I cannot cut the retail price, and my shipping costs are more than what Amazon is. But if you want a signed book, you can buy from me and buy from either. I'm fine. There will be an audio version for book 1 that is slated to be out through Amazon as well. We finally got a deal done after years and years, and it's proceeding. In 2 months. It should be available, and then book 2 will come out about 2 months after that. So look forward to that. That's a growing part of the market, and it's a very complicated project on each.
Are they having you narrate?
No, I just don't have the time to do it. So.
Gotcha.
The person that is reading it is a good reader and is familiar with apocryphal, but we're going back and forth on pronunciations, and because there's so many different pronunciations, like you were saying, she or see. I mean, it could be Siday, could be Shay. There's all different sorts of pronunciations. Shed is another one.
Yeah.
That's spelled Sidhe for people who aren't familiar with that. So that's the best way to get hold of my book. It's also available on most online bookstores, and the Amazons around the world just received inventory last week. So Canada has it now. I think UK got theirs. Australia should be shortly. So the printed book is getting out there, and hopefully we'll start to see the book show up on some brick and mortar shelves fairly quickly as well. They're still catching up with the print runs and things like that. And so you can also contact me through that website. So I'm just going to put my power on my laptop here. It looks like it's going to run out. And so there's a contact the author. And if you want to get a document from me, and you can do that, just text it to me through that contact the author. That is my email address for the website. It comes through on or you go directly to Genesis6conspiracy@gmail.com, again with the number 6. So Genesis6conspiracy@gmail.com. Ask for the document by name or by subject area. I have a lot of documents, and no, I don't send them all out at once, and I don't have them packaged to do that because if somebody wanted, let's say, only half, it would be difficult to customize it down. There's just that many in it, and too many for somebody who just wants RH negative or something. Just name the topics. I'll send them to you, and be patient, and I will get back to you. Or if you ask a question, that's how you get a hold of me as well. Do not send me videos because I get 40 or 50 a week and I don't have time to watch any of them. I apologize for that. I'd love to, but I just can't. So, yeah, so that's the best way to get a hold of me, and that's the best way to get a hold of my book. And hopefully some of the things that we've talked about today connect some dots. Yeah. That's what both books are designed to do. And like I say, if you like Dr. Heiser's work, this is Dr. Heiser on steroids. Yeah. And this book is as unique as book 1, but in a different way. And there is not a book out there like this that's on the market, and you're going to learn more about it. You know, the first 3 sections are just basic information you have to understand prehistory and end time prophecy. And hopefully I tell it in a way that keeps your attention. But when it comes down to it, what you are really learning about is a couple of New Testament passages, and it's about that we war not against flesh and blood, but powers and principalities and spiritual beings in dark places and high places, right? And that we are dealing with the invisible ones and the visible ones who we fight against. And we need to understand that the visible ones are the offspring and the bloodlines of the fallen angels, and the invisible ones are the disembodied spirits of the visible ones, and they are the fallen angels. And that the Bible does talk about bloodlines. And I bring that in from a biblical perspective of how we know there's a seed that we're fighting, and it's more than just going to Genesis 3:15. I am going to give you several passages and in terms of how we know there's a seed that we're fighting with that comes to fulfillment in the one passage. And if people want to look at 21:8 to 10, that is just an eye-popping understanding of this seed that's got to be destroyed and removed from human seed in the end time, in the wrath of God. So I bring all of that together so that people understand who we're actually dealing with. And if you can accept what the Bible says in its meaning, then you can get into the details and understand that better. And for me, it brings peace. Once I got over the cognizant dissonance of all of this and different levels as you go through, I prefer knowing, even though it brings sorrow and grief, than not knowing and being so frustrated. And so it's interesting to see how things play out, but it's not surprising. It may be a bit surprising in the nuances to it, but directionally, this has to happen, unfortunately. And better to know than not know, and hopefully help others by knowing. And that's what it's all about, is can we communicate this information in a way that's logical, biblically based, and to let people absorb it at their ability to absorb it, and understanding that not all Christians are going to accept what we say. And there's going to be great division in the tribulation of the saints, and they're going to be turning each other in to Babylon during that tribulation. So not everybody's going to stay with the Bible, but we need to understand that. We need to be patient, but we need to plant seeds with people. So it's about trying to explain it to them in a way that we don't lose our credibility. That's why we can't get ahead of ourselves on end time chronology. We have to be accurate, and we don't want to have people lose faith because it doesn't happen exactly the way that people have laid out dates and things. So, but it's to me, for me, I would say to people is that life gets better when you understand it better.
You have faith and assurance.
I just want to thank you, Gary, for coming on. I mean, this is a dream having you here, Brandon. I appreciate you inviting me. I mean, this was amazing. Thanks
you
for
guys. Co-hosting, Cliff. And Gary, again, thank you so much for coming on. We're incredibly grateful for your knowledge and your wealth of information. Hope to have you on again sometime at some point in the future when you have book 3 coming out.
Absolutely. Or if you want to bring me back at some other point in time, because you'll have read some things in the book that you want to maybe go over. Just a matter of scheduling.
I'm geeking out right now that it's sitting right next to me, and I'm like, I just got to read it now. Sorry. All right, Gary, thank you. We'll catch you on the next one.
Good night.